"I am this widow's lawyer," Jesus told the judge, and something impossible happened. Grace Walker was 58 years old when she realized that the justice of men is not always just. Not because she had read it in a book or because someone had warned her, but because that Monday morning, while she was folding the last shirt she had sewn during the night, she received the notice that would change her life forever. It arrived in a plain, beige envelope, one of those government-issued ones that never bring good news. The courier dropped it on her doorstep and walked away without looking back, as if he already knew the weight it carried. Grace opened the door, still wearing her sewing apron, her fingers stiff from a night of work. She bent down, picked up the envelope, and felt a cold tremor run through her hands. Inside was a summons from Summit First Bank, declaring that her home, her sanctuary, the place where she had raised her 2 children and cared for her dying husband, was being repossessed for unpaid mortgage balance. Emily, her 14-year-old daughter, I heard the shaky breath her mother drew and rushed to her side. Mason, 16, read the document over her shoulder, his face tightening with disbelief. "Mom, this is wrong." Dad paid the house off. "I remember the day he brought home the receipt." Grace nodded weakly, her eyes stinging. She remembered it too. Her husband, Michael, frail but proud, holding a stamped document with trembling hands and whispering, "You'll never have to worry about this home again." But now the bank claimed otherwise. And the proof, the receipt Michael had shown her, was nowhere to be found. Grace sank onto the porch step, the morning sun casting long shadows across the yard as the truth settled into her bones. In 4 days, she would have to stand alone in court against a powerful bank, with no money, no lawyer, and no evidence. She didn't know it yet, but heaven was already preparing to intervene. Grace Walker had never expected life to turn out this way. In the quiet neighborhoods of Cleveland's East Side, she was known simply as the woman who worked 2 jobs, who never complained, who loved her family fiercely. For 30 years, the modest house on Maple Ridge Lane had been the center of everything she and her husband, Michael, built together. Neighbors often recalled seeing them repainting the porch in summer, decorating the windows at Christmas, or tending the small rose garden Michael planted for the days Grace would need something beautiful to look at. Michael's final years had tested them in ways neither had imagined. Cancer stole his strength slowly. Yet even in his weakest months, he insisted on working overtime just to finish paying off the mortgage. His promise echoed often in the household, "No matter what happens to me, Grace, you and the kids will always have a home." The night he came back from the bank with the stamped receipt, he had held it like treasure, his tired smile shining with relief. Ethan remembered the way his father lifted the paper, telling him to keep it safe. Lily remembered the way her mother cried tears of closure, of survival, of a future secured. After Michael passed, Grace kept everything exactly where he had left it. The house still smelled faintly of his aftershave. His tools stayed, neatly hung in the garage. She worked nights as a seamstress, mornings as a caregiver, doing whatever it took to keep stability for Ethan and Lily. The children tried their best to be strong, each carrying a quiet determination that would have made their father proud. To everyone around her, Grace appeared steady tired. Yes, but anchored by faith and Michael's last act of love. No one imagined she would ever face a threat to the home he died protecting. Not the neighbors, not her church community, not even her children. And least of all, Grace herself, because in her heart, in her memory, and in her hands, Michael had paid every last dollar. But just days before the courtroom moment that would shake heaven and earth, she discovered a truth more terrifying than grief. The system claimed she owed money she did not owe, and the one document that could save her, the final receipt Michael had held with trembling pride, was nowhere to be found. The morning the envelope arrived, the Walker home was unusually still. A cold October wind swept across Maple Ridge Lane, rattling loose branches and carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. Grace had just finished folding the last shirt from an overnight sewing shift when a sharp thud echoed against the front door. No knock. No voice, just the dull slap of something pushed into the mail slot. Ethan was the first to notice the thick manila envelope lying on the welcome mat. He bent to pick it up, frowning at the red-stamped words, "Urgent Court Notice." His stomach tightened as he handed it to his mother. From the living room, couch, Lily watched the color drain from Grace's face before she even opened it. Inside, the pages were cold and clinical. A foreclosure summons. A demand from Heritage National Bank stating that Grace had defaulted on her mortgage. A court date, Friday, 9 a.m., just 4 days away. And the final line, printed in bold. Eviction proceedings may begin. Immediately following the hearing, Grace sank onto the nearest chair, her hands trembling. She read the words again and again, as if repetition might change their meaning. Ethan knelt beside her, confusion sharpening into panic. "Mom, this isn't real." "Right. Dad paid everything. You told us. We saw the paper." Lily's voice cracked. "Why are they saying we still owe money?" In the silence that followed, the weight of the moment pressed against all three of them. Memories of Michael, his promises, his sacrifice, his final months of pain seemed to hang in the air like a fragile thread stretched too thin. Grace tried to steady her breathing, but fear settled into her chest with a heaviness she had never known. Around them, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves had heard the news and braced for impact. For 30 years, it had been their sanctuary. Now it felt suddenly vulnerable, as though it could be taken from them with the stroke of a judge's pen. Outside, the wind kept blowing across the quiet street, unaware that inside the little house on the corner, one family's world had just begun to fall apart. The next morning, Grace walked the 8 blocks to Heritage National Bank, clutching a folder packed with every document she had ever saved. Cleveland's downtown towers loomed above her, sharp-edged and impersonal, a world far removed from the quiet streets of Maple Ridge Lane. Inside the marble lobby, muted conversations echoed off high ceilings. People in pressed suits hurried past without noticing the exhausted woman standing at the reception desk. The young receptionist barely glanced up. Her nails clicked against the keyboard as she asked, "Do you have an appointment?" Grace shook her head gently. I received a foreclosure notice. My husband paid off our home. I need someone to check the records." The receptionist sighed, her expression tightening with practiced indifference. "Foreclosure cases are handled by our legal department only. If you received a summons, there's nothing anyone here can do." Grace tried again, gripping the edge of the counter. "Please. There must be a mistake. My husband, Michael Walker, he made the final payment before he passed. He showed me the receipt. Do you have that receipt with you?" It's missing, but you must have a copy." This time the receptionist finally looked at her, really looked, though not with sympathy. More like someone observing an inconvenience. "Mrs. Walker, our system keeps perfect digital records. If the payment isn't there, it wasn't made." Across the lobby, a pair of bank employees exchanged glances, whispers melting into a soft laugh as Grace's voice tightened with desperation. Embarrassment rose in her throat. She felt small, out of place, a woman pleading for something the system had already decided. When she asked whether she could speak to someone higher up, the receptionist's answer was curt. "You'll need a lawyer for that. Bring one to court." Grace lowered her eyes. "I can't afford a lawyer." The shrug she received in return was more painful than the words. Then you'll have to represent yourself. Walking out into the bright morning light, Grace felt the world tilt under her feet. She passed polished windows reflecting lives untouched by hardship, people sipping coffee, scrolling through phones, unaware of the woman whose entire future had just been dismissed with a single indifferent sentence. The system she had trusted didn't see her. Worse, it didn't care. That night, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves understood what was at stake. The children had gone to bed early, exhausted from worry. The hum of the old furnace echoed down the hallway, a reminder of the winter quickly approaching, a winter they might face without a home. Grace sat alone at the kitchen table. The foreclosure notice spread open beneath the dim yellow light. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper again and again, as though she might rewrite its meaning, imply, by touching it. The clock on the microwave blinked 11:42 p.m. She hadn't eaten. She hadn't slept. She hadn't stopped replaying the receptionist's cold words. If the payment isn't in the system, it wasn't made. In the living room, a framed photo of Michael caught the glow of the streetlights outside. His tired but gentle smile seemed almost alive, almost reassuring. He had fought so hard to finish paying off that mortgage. He had worked double shifts, driven himself through pain, refused to give up because he wanted his family to be safe. The house was supposed to be his legacy of protection. Losing it felt like losing him all over again. Finally, Grace pushed her chair back and fell to her knees beside the table. There was no thought of dignity now, only desperation so raw it stripped everything unnecessary away. She clasped her hands, squeezing them until they ached. Jesus, Lord Jesus, she whispered, her voice breaking in the stillness. I don't have a lawyer. I don't have evidence. I don't even have the strength to fight this. But you saw Michael pay. You saw every hour he worked. You saw his suffering. You saw the truth. Tears fell freely as she bowed her head lower, forehead touching the cold floor. If the world won't defend us, will you defend us? If no one will stand with us in court, will you stand there? Please, Jesus, be my lawyer. Be the one who speaks when I have no words left. In her room, Lily heard the soft sobs drifting down the hallway. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, whispering her own prayer into the darkness. Ethan stared at the ceiling, fists clenched, silently begging God to save the only home he had ever known. And somewhere beyond the quiet of that small Cleveland house, a promise stirred, one Grace could not yet hear, but one heaven had already begun to answer. That night, exhaustion finally pulled Grace into sleep, though her mind was still tangled in fear. But the moment her eyes closed, the world around her shifted. She found herself standing in a vast courtroom, not the one in Cleveland, but something grander, older, lit by a soft, golden radiance. There were no spectators, no attorneys, no rustling papers, only silence, and a presence she could feel before she could see. A gentle wind stirred, though there were no windows. The air shimmered, and from the center of the room stepped a figure she couldn't fully make out, only brightness, warmth, and a power that made her knees weaken. The light grew, enveloping the judge's bench, and a voice echoed through the hall. It wasn't loud, but it shook the foundations beneath her feet. Do not be afraid, Grace. I am your defender. The words filled her with a peace she hadn't felt since Michael was alive. She tried to speak, but emotion stole her breath. All she could do was listen as the voice continued, steady and sure. You will not stand alone. I will be your lawyer. When the golden light dissolved, she felt something like a gentle hand resting over her heart, firm, reassuring. And then the dream faded. Grace woke with a sudden gasp. The room was dim, the streetlight casting long shadows across the ceiling. But the fear that had consumed her the night before had softened, replaced by a quiet resolve she didn't fully understand. Her breathing steadied. Her shoulders loosened. Something had changed. She rose before dawn, moving silently through the house. Ethan found her in the kitchen, her eyes tired but strangely clear. He asked if she had slept at all. Grace simply answered, "Enough." Though what she meant was more than sleep, she had been strengthened. Later that morning, she walked to St. Andrew's Catholic Church. The old wooden doors creaked as she entered. Father Thomas Reed looked up from the altar, surprised to see her so early. She told him everything: the notice, the humiliation at the bank, the missing receipt, and finally, the dream. The priest listened with the calm patience of someone who had witnessed more miracles than he spoke of. "Grace," he said gently, "when Jesus Christ says he will defend you, he will. Stand firm. Tell the truth. And let him speak where you cannot." For the first time in days, Grace felt steady enough to breathe deeply. The battle ahead was still impossible, but something within her had shifted. She walked back into the cold morning air, not as a woman defeated, but as a woman held upright by a promise she knew was real. Friday morning arrived with a cold wind sweeping across downtown Cleveland, carrying a tension that seemed to settle over the courthouse steps. Families hurried past with steaming coffee cups. Lawyers brushed snowflakes off leather briefcases, and the imposing stone columns of the Cuyahoga County Courthouse rose like a reminder of how small one person could feel in the shadow of systems built far above them. Grace Walker stood at the bottom of those steps, smoothing the wrinkles of her black dress, the same one she wore the day she buried Michael. Ethan adjusted the collar of his father's old shirt, trying to look older than 16. Lily held tightly onto her mother's hand, her breath clouding in the chilly air. They looked like a family bracing for a storm no one else could see. Inside courtroom 4B, the contrast was jarring. On one side, Heritage National Bank's legal team arranged their laptops, binders, and color-coded files with confident efficiency. Their lead attorney, a man named Daniel Price, tapped his pen rhythmically as he reviewed their argument, an argument they'd won dozens of times before. Behind them sat Richard Coleman, the bank's CEO. Adjusting his cufflinks with the satisfaction of someone certain victory was already his. Across the aisle, Grace took her seat with nothing but her worn folder and the quiet strength she woke up with after her dream. The way she clutched that folder revealed more than words ever could. She was not prepared for legal warfare, but she had come anyway. Judge Robert Hayes entered, his robe sweeping behind him. His expression was steady, professional, but something in his eyes hinted at the weight he still carried from the mysterious voice he'd heard days before. A voice no one else knew about. A voice that had unsettled him more than he dared admit. Ethan watched his mother nervously, feeling the pressure build in his chest. Lily whispered a small prayer under her breath, her fingers gripping the edge of the bench. To the attorneys, it was a simple foreclosure case. To the children, it was their father's final promise on trial. To Judge Hayes, it was a moment haunted by a warning he could not explain. To Grace, it was the battlefield where she hoped Jesus Christ would stand beside her. And as the judge cleared his throat to begin, it felt as though every breath in the room held its place, waiting for something no one could predict. The arguments began predictably cold, polished, and procedural. Daniel Price presented the bank's case with the smooth confidence of a man who had spent a career winning by sheer force of paperwork. He pointed to the payment history projected on the courtroom screen, a digital timeline showing a glaring blank space where the final mortgage payment should have been. "Your Honor," he concluded, "there is no record, digital or physical, of a completed payoff. The system is clear. The walkers still owe the balance. Grace felt the room tilt as every eye turned to her. Judge Hayes leaned forward. Mrs. Walker, do you have any evidence to present? She opened her folder with trembling hands. Inside were neatly arranged documents, bank statements, old receipts, letters Michael had saved, but not the one that mattered. Not the final confirmation. Her voice cracked as she said the words she dreaded. I don't have the last receipt, but my husband paid it. He paid every cent. He promised us this house was ours. A quiet scoff came from Coleman's row. The attorneys exchanged amused glances. Judge Hayes exhaled, preparing to issue a ruling he already hated himself for. He lifted the gavel, and that was when Grace suddenly stood. Not just stood, she stepped into the center of the courtroom and fell to her knees. Gasps rippled through the room. Even the stenographer paused. Ethan grabbed the edge of the bench, eyes wide. Lily whispered, "Mom, please." But Grace lifted her hands toward the ceiling, her voice breaking open. "Lord Jesus Christ, you saw Michael pay. You saw how hard he worked. If I have no lawyer here, be my lawyer. If I have no voice, speak for me. Defend us. Jesus. Defend my children." Silence followed, heavy, electric. Then it happened. Judge Hayes froze, his fingers tightening around the gavel. A sound soft yet overwhelming echoed within him, bypassing his ears entirely. A voice, unmistakable, powerful, filled with authority not of this world. "I am the lawyer of this widow." The judge's breath stopped. His vision blurred at the edges. Something holy pressed into the room, invisible yet undeniable. No one else heard the words, but everyone felt the shift, as if an unseen presence had stepped forward, claiming the space where no attorney stood. And in that impossible, trembling moment, nothing in courtroom 4B was the same again. The courtroom remained frozen as Judge Hayes abruptly called for a 30-minute recess. He didn't offer an explanation. He simply stood, his face pale, and retreated through the side door with a stiffness that unsettled everyone watching. Grace stayed on her knees, whispering prayers through trembling lips, while Ethan and Lily clung to each other in silence. The bank's lawyers exchanged confused whispers, unaware that the judge carried a secret none of them could imagine. Inside his chambers, Hayes locked the door behind him and pressed both hands to the desk, as if steadying himself against an unseen force. The voice he had heard, commanding, unmistakable, still echoed through his mind. "I am the lawyer of this widow." He tried to reason, to blame stress, fatigue, anything human. But something stronger than logic compelled him to check the case files again. He opened the Toa-on database, pulling up the Walker foreclosure record. For a moment, everything looked normal. Then the cursor moved. On its own. Without his touch, lines of text flickered. A hidden directory appeared, one he had never seen before, in his 20 years on the bench. The folder's name glowed faintly, as if highlighted by an invisible hand. Archive, Walker. His breath shortened. He double-clicked. A single document loaded an image scan, TEMA stamped 2 years earlier. Final mortgage payment, Walker. Michael, paid in full. Stamped. Signed. Certified. The exact document Grace had described. But the system shouldn't have had it. The bank had sworn it didn't exist, and the metadata showed something impossible. Uploaded 3 minutes earlier. By no user. No terminal. No record of access. A knock on the door startled him. Archivist Linda Parsons entered with a puzzled expression. She held a worn paper file in her hands. "Judge," This just appeared on my desk. No one brought it. It's the Walker payoff file. The same document, the same signature, the same proof. Judge Hayes felt the weight of something holy settle over him. Not metaphorically, literally. The air grew warm, thick, alive. In that moment, he knew. Grace Walker did not walk into this courtroom alone. Someone greater had placed his hand on the evidence. Someone who had heard her prayer. And Jesus Christ, the advocate of widows, had entered the case. When Judge Hayes returned to courtroom 4B, something about him had changed. His steps were slower, more deliberate, as though he carried the weight of an unseen truth. The attorneys straightened, expecting a swift ruling in the bank's favor. Coleman leaned back with a smirk, already imagining the property sliding neatly into his development plans. But Grace sensed the shift the moment the judge took his seat. Ethan noticed it too, the way the judge's hands trembled slightly, the way he avoided looking at the bank's legal team. Lily whispered. Something happened, though she couldn't say how she knew. Judge Hayes cleared his throat, lifted a document, and addressed the courtroom. This court has obtained new evidence. The bank's attorneys snapped to attention. Coleman's smirk vanished. The judge held up the scanned image, high resolution. Timestamped. Irrefutable. According to this record, Michael Walker did complete the final mortgage payment. Paid in full. Certified by Heritage National Bank. A stunned silence followed. Daniel Price stood abruptly. Your Honor, that is impossible. Our system contains no such record bind. It does now, Hayes replied sharply. And the physical file has been recovered. He nodded to the bailiff, who handed over the original paper document signed, stamped, indisputable. Coleman's face drained of color. Price's lips parted, but no argument came out. The judge wasn't done. He ordered Carl Jennings, the mid-level bank employee whose signature appeared on the receipt, to take the stand. Carl entered red-eyed and shaking, clearly aware that the truth had finally surfaced. Under oath, his confession spilled out in broken sentences. Yes, the payment was made. Yes, he stamped it and filed it. And yes, he had been ordered by Richard Coleman to delete the record and remove the physical file from the bank's archives. A ripple of outrage spread across the courtroom. Ethan gripped the bench, stunned. Grace covered her mouth. Tears welling, but not of fear. This time, Lily reached for her brother's hand. Coleman lashed out, standing violently. He's lying. He's protecting himself. But Judge Hayes silenced him with a single raised hand. Mr. Coleman, an investigation will be opened immediately into mortgage fraud, evidence tampering, and coercion. Until then, you are not to leave the state of Ohio. The judge turned back to Grace, his voice softer now. This case is dismissed. The home belongs to the Walker family. And Mrs. Walker, justice has been served. In the stunned quiet that followed, it became clear to everyone present. This was not merely the fall of a corrupt man. It was justice delivered from a higher court. By noon, the story had escaped the walls of courtroom 4B and was sprinting across Ohio like wildfire. What began as a bewildering legal anomaly, a missing mortgage record that mysteriously reappeared, quickly evolved into something people had no language for. Reporters replayed the footage of Grace Walker leaving the courthouse, trembling, her children at her side, whispering through tears, Jesus Christ defended us today. That sentence alone detonated across social media. Clips circulated on TikTok, then Instagram, then national news. Hashtags appeared within hours. Number, the widow and her lawyer. Number, Jesus in court. Number, Walker miracle. But the most surprising reaction didn't come from skeptics or religious commentators. It came from ordinary people, single mothers, veterans, grandparents, young professionals, who began sharing their own stories of impossible moments when they believed God had intervened. In churches across the Midwest, pastors paused mid-sermon to reference the case. Bible study groups replayed the news segment showing Judge Hayes, normally rigid, unemotional, speaking with a tremor in his voice as he confirmed that new evidence appeared during recess. Even legal experts, usually allergic to supernatural explanations, admitted they had never seen a digital file materialize in a system without a log, or an archive box reappear after being marked lost. And then something unexpected happened. People who had drifted away from faith began returning. A public defender in Cleveland said the story pushed him back into church after 15 years. A young woman in Phoenix wrote that Grace's prayer in the courtroom saved her from giving up on life. A retired judge confessed online that he now prayed before every ruling because if Jesus could walk into one courtroom, he can walk into another. The movement grew quietly at first prayer circles forming in living rooms, neighbors gathering to support families in foreclosure, attorneys volunteering nights to help the vulnerable. Grace Walker had not asked for a spotlight. She had not sought a platform, but her simple, desperate prayer, spoken on her knees in a courtroom built for men, not miracles, ignited something no one could contain. What happened to her became more than a victory. It became a spark, one that awakened faith in thousands who had forgotten that Jesus Christ still steps into impossible situations and still wins cases no one else can. Years after the courtroom miracle, the ripple of Grace Walker's victory had grown into something no one, least of all Grace, could have imagined. What began as a widow on her knees became a nationwide reform, a cultural shift, and ultimately, a legacy rooted not in her name, but in the name of the one who defended her. It started quietly, neighbors asking Grace how they could help others in situations like hers. Then attorneys began reaching out, volunteering free hours. Then churches. Then universities. And soon, what had once been a single miracle became the foundation for a movement. Grace's son, Mason, who once trembled in that courtroom, Pew now studied law with fire in his eyes, determined to defend families who felt as powerless as his once had. Emily, now older and bold, in a way only those who have witnessed the impossible can be, pursued social work and joined Imam. Together with their mother, they founded the Divine Advocate Foundation, a nonprofit offering free legal defense to widows, single parents, and low-income families fighting housing fraud and predatory institutions. Within 5 years, the foundation had chapters in 7 states. Within 10, it was operating nationwide. Judges cited the Walker precedent, a legal reform passed after public pressure and congressional hearings sparked by Grace's testimony. Banks were required to maintain transparent digital records. Foreclosure courts were monitored by independent auditors. Fraudulent developers faced harsher penalties. But the greater change wasn't procedural. It was spiritual. Courtrooms began opening each day with a moment of silence for clarity, humility, and justice. Prayer rooms were installed in legal aid centers. Tens of thousands returned to church. And many quietly admitted that everything began with the unforgettable headline, Jesus Christ spoke for a widow. On the 10th anniversary of the case, crowds filled the Ohio State Capitol lawn to dedicate a memorial plaque honoring the miracle that sparked a national awakening. Grace stood there, hair silver now, eyes bright, surrounded by hundreds of families saved from losing their homes. She didn't speak of herself. She spoke of Jesus, the advocate, the defender, the one who still intervenes. And as her voice carried across the crowd, one truth lingered in the air like a promise. When Jesus Christ is your lawyer, the outcome is never in doubt. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Jesus Christ Encounters for more true stories of faith, miracles, and redemption.